सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने भी इस पूरे मामले में जो आरोपी हैं रणवीर अलाहाबादी उसको काफ़ी फटकार लगाई। जो लैंग्वेज यूज़ होते थे काफ़ी ऑब्जेक्शनेबल थे। सुप्रीम कोर्ट में ये बोला।
एडवोकेट आशीष जी राय और उनके सहकारी लोगों ने मुझे राज्य महिला आयोग को एक कंप्लेंट दर्ज की थी। उन्होंने उसमें कहा था कि रणवीर अलाहाबादी और उनकी पूरी टीम बहुत गंदे कंटेंट लेके यूट्यूब पे कुछ वीडियो अपलोड करते हैं और एक प्रोग्राम लेते हैं कि उसके ऊपर कार्रवाई की जाए। तो उसका रेफरेंस लेके
Good evening, you're watching Brass Tacks. I'm Zakka. Jacob, the Supreme Court of India today gave a tongue lashing to Ranveer Allahbadia while giving him the legal relief that he had sought, that there will be no coercive action, no arrest against him, and that is the relief that he had approached the court for in the first place. The court, though, did ask his counsel, and pretty strong language used, is this acceptable? Do you accept these comments? Are not his comments obscene? Ranveer Allabadia has dirt in his mind. It is an insult to his parents, and you can't behave like this in an Indian society. Now, to be fair, the court said these in words, in oral observations, which of course do not find their place in the final order of the court, and the final order restricts itself strictly to the legal relief that was sought, which Mr. Allahabadia has now got. But just to play devil's advocate, did the court go too far with this whole moral lecturing, this whole grandstanding on values, if you will? After all, Ranveer Allahbadia is not a high school student, and neither are our learned judges high school principals. So what's the point of all this moral grandstanding and lecturing? Where really is the nub of the problem? Is it because free speech in this country, which is short of incitement of violence, which is short of saying stuff against the country, against national interest, is free speech which does not physically hurt another person? Why is that not protected in this country? Why is such free speech, which is not physically hurtful to a third person, why is that free speech not protected under the Constitution? Why is that not absolute? We'll try and probe that, but first, let's bring you up to speed with what the Supreme Court bench of Justices Surya Kant and N. Koteshwar Singh said to Ranveer Allahbadia today. And also his counsel, Advocate Chandrachud, who was appearing on Ranveer Allahbadia's behalf, was asked by the learned judges if he was defending the kind of language that was used by Ranveer Allahbadia on that show, India's Got Latent, hosted by Samay Raina. The counsel appearing for the YouTube podcaster did admit that he was disgusted by the language that his client used, but he questioned whether it stood to be perceived as a criminal offence. Justice Suryakant to this asked, if this is not obscenity, then what is? The court called Ranveer Allahbadia's comments the height of irresponsibility. The bench also observed that there was something dirty in the person's mind that had been vomited by him through this program. Why the courts should give him a favor was also a question that the two-judge bench asked. The Supreme Court chastised the beer biceps podcaster, as he's known, for crossing the line just because he happened to be a popular influencer, a popular YouTuber, highlighting that this was an insult to his parents, to his upbringing. It reeked of his perversion, said the honorable judges. Also reminding that this is not how one should be behaving in Indian society. Let's listen into some of the reactions that have been coming into this story, because clearly this story has divided popular opinion, both on social media and otherwise, on whether or not YouTubers and broadcasters and such influencers who have massive followings should be a little more circumspect in their public comments.
की प्रत्येकाला स्वातंत्र्य आहे, अभिव्यक्तीचं स्वातंत्र्य आहे, पण त्याची देखील सीमा आहे. अभिव्यक्तीचं जे स्वातंत्र्य आपल्या संविधानाने दिलेलं आहे ते काही असीमित नाही आहे. तुम्ही दुसऱ्याच्या अभिव्यक्ती स्वातंत्र्यावर आपल्या स्वातंत्र्याच्या माध्यमातून घाला घालू शकत नाही. त्यामुळे ज्या ठिकाणी अश्लीलता ही परिसीमेच्या बाहेर जाते त्या ठिकाणी कारवाई करणं हे गरजेचं असतं. मात्र या संदर्भात काही नियमावली तयार करता येईल का, जरूर केंद्र सरकारची आमची चर्चा चाललेली.
So there's been days of continued social media backlash. There's been a commercial boycott. There are threats from all kinds of people. There are multiple police cases that have been filed against Ranveer Allahbadia. There's a case in Assam. There's a case in Mumbai. There's a case in Rajasthan. Today he finally got some limited legal relief, the kind of relief that he had sought. But there are certain caveats that come along with that relief. Ranveer Allahbadia's arrest has been stayed in all FIRs that have been registered against him. No more FIRs can further be registered against Allahabadia, and that too on the basis of the complaint of obscenity or profanity that he used on the show India's Got Latent. The Supreme Court also observed that Ranveer Allahabadia shall be at liberty to approach the local police, either in Maharashtra or in Assam. Remember, there are multiple cases against him in these two states, whether he requires protection of life and liberty in case of any threat that impedes him from joining the investigation. Remember, he still has not joined the investigation either in the Mumbai FIR or in the Assam case. Allahabadia has also been asked to deposit his passport with the Thane police, putting his foreign travels on a temporary hold. He cannot leave the country without seeking permission from the Supreme Court. Allahabadia and his associates have also been barred from airing any show until the law takes its own course and finally reaches some kind of a conclusion in this matter. All right, so some pretty strong words from the highest court of the land, yet at the same time, despite giving Ranveer Allahbadia a tongue lashing, the court did give him the legal relief that he sought, which is no coercive action to be taken against him. Let's go straight across to senior Supreme Court advocate Mr. Arima Sundaram, who's now joining us. So here's a sampling of what the court observed orally. It's not part of the order. Do you subscribe to the language he's used? What is the parameter of obscenity? If this is not obscenity, then what is? There is dirt in Ranveer Allahbadia's mind. Do you think the court has gone a little overboard and treated him like almost like a high school kid, and that the court had to play the role of a school principal here?
Look, let's accept one fact. Anyone who wants to use a public platform where he wants to state his thoughts on the basis of freedom of expression will always get the benefits of a healthy, progressive, great thought. He will equally get the brickbats which will follow a prurient, perverse thought. That's but natural. And such a person has to be ready both for the popularity and accolades which could follow from such public occurrences, or from the brickbats which could follow. At the same time, the person certainly has a right to expect protection of his self, protection of his person, and protection against any violence to him, although he cannot really object to any immunity from people being harsh on him verbally for what he has said.
Okay.
So actually what you saw today is exactly that. He went to a court to ask for relief to protect his rights. Mm-hmm. He got a lambasting from a public court for his utterances, but at the same time, he got the protection from the court that he legally deserves. One may say that the court could have been more subdued in what it said, or it can equally be that the court stated what it felt about public occurrences. After all, the court is also a public forum.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the court ensured that his self was protected, gave him his protection from arrest, gave him his constitutional rights.
I do want to come to a larger debate, and this is going on in the West, for example, in the US. You're seeing this on social media about free speech and whether free speech should be absolute or not. In India, of course, free speech is not absolute. There are reasonable restrictions as has been placed in the articles of the Constitution. But increasingly, particularly when it comes to social media utterances by public personalities, if there is no direct link or direct incitement to violence, should free speech be protected? That all and sundry can't go and say, oh, a section of society has been admonished, or a section of society has been outraged, therefore there needs to be strictures on so and so. Can there be a way to protect free speech here in this country without, of course, everyone being sort of the moral custodian of what can and cannot be said?
Well, each country has its own definition of the restraints or restrictions on free speech. In India, you find the restrictions in Article 19(2) itself, which does not limit the restriction only to incitement to violence or public order, or attacking the sovereignty integrity of India. It could also be defamatory, for one thing. Or it could be against, let's say, the law against obscenity. Well, let me just give you one simple example. For example, in many countries, pornography and public display of pornography is considered a part of freedom of expression. Whereas in India, it is not. And censorship of any public performance of obscene content has been recognized by the Supreme Court more than 4 decades ago. And I don't think there's been any question of changing that. And in fact, the Civil Procedure Code, the Criminal Acts also, the Criminal Penal Code also very clearly does make obscenity in public places a crime and therefore a banned event.
Okay, Mr. Arima Sundaram, thank you very much for joining us and putting that into perspective for our viewers. Thank you. Let's shift focus to the other story that we're tracking. Election Commissioner Gyanesh Kumar has now been elevated and appointed as India's next Chief Election Commissioner. The decision of his appointment was taken during a meeting of the key 3-member selection committee, which comprises the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Home Minister Amit Shah, and the Leader of the Opposition Rahul Gandhi. Mr. Gandhi dissented against the selection and, in fact, the process itself. Gyanesh Kumar's appointment follows the new law that was passed in 2023, which changed the process of selecting the Chief Election Commissioner. Now, previously, up until 2023, the President appointed the CEC based on the Prime Minister and the Cabinet's recommendation. According to the opposition, the committee that's been comprised, which has the PM, the HM, and the Leader of the Opposition, is flawed because of the inherent bias which would favor the view of the government. The government has a majority say with 2 representatives, whereas the opposition has only 1 member there. The opposition has criticized that with this pattern, a fair decision in appointing the Chief Election Commissioner is not possible. Another objection was that the matter is sub judice. The Supreme Court is hearing this matter as early as tomorrow. It's a new challenge to this new selection panel that's been proposed by the government and basis which the new Chief Election Commissioner has been appointed. The opposition believes that there was no tearing hurry to appoint the new Chief Election Commissioner, and the government could have delayed this decision until the Supreme Court hearing tomorrow. The government's contention is the outgoing Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. Rajiv Kumar, his tenure ended today, and the Election Commission could not have been without a head even for 24 hours. Now, Rahul Gandhi, who gave his dissent note to both the Prime Minister and the Home Minister, both of whom are part of this committee, also put out that dissent note on social media. He said that most fundamental aspect of an independent election commission that is free from executive interference is the process of choosing the Chief Election Commissioner and the 2 election commissioners. He wrote about the 2023 Constitution Bench judgment, which had been given when D.Y. Chandrachud was CJI, which mandated that the selection panel have the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, and the sitting Chief Justice of India. That, of course, was changed by law in government, in Parliament. They brought in a law which made it, instead of the Chief Justice of India, a cabinet minister, the Prime Minister, and the Leader of the Opposition. Now, according to Rahul Gandhi, this decision to exclude the CJI from the selection committee violates the Supreme Court order and it undermines the trust of millions of voters. He also highlighted his responsibility as Leader of the Opposition to uphold the ideals of India's founding fathers and hold the government accountable on this decision. His letter says, and these are the words used by Rahul Gandhi, the decision taken on the CEC is disrespectful and discourteous both for the Prime Minister and the Home Minister to have made a midnight decision to select the new CEC when the very composition of the committee and the process itself is being challenged in the Supreme Court.
सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने खुद ही कहा था कि इसमें एक सत्ता पक्ष से, एक विपक्ष से और एक सुप्रीम कोर्ट का चीफ जस्टिस, लेकिन उसको कानून बना के बदल दिया गया और सुप्रीम कोर्ट में मामला अभी भी लंबित है। और राहुल जी ने पहले ही लोकसभा में कहा कि 2-1 से फैसला होगा तो क्या होगा वो सबको पता है ना, तो ये केवल फॉर्मेलिटी भर है। तो ये सरकार जो है कि ऐसे संस्थाओं को भी में भी राजनीति कर रहे हैं।
As leader of the opposition, he has every right to dissent. That's why he is there. He is there to give a point of view. He is not there simply to agree with what the government suggests or proposes.
So who exactly is Gyanesh Kumar, the new Chief Election Commissioner? He's a retired Indian Administrative Service officer from the Kerala cadre. He previously served as the Cooperation Secretary to the Government of India. He's held various significant positions within the government. His appointment as the Chief Election Commissioner is set to take effect from the 19th of February, which is tomorrow. He also played an important role in the implementation of decisions relating to the abrogation of Article 370 in Jammu and Kashmir in 2019. At that time, he was serving in the Union Home Ministry. During his tenure as Election Commissioner, Gyanesh Kumar will conduct the assembly elections in 20 states. He's got an extended tenure which runs all the way up to January of 2029, just before the next general elections are slated. He will be at the helm during the presidential election as well as the vice presidential election, both of which are expected in 2027. And of course, he will be retired unless, of course, he gets a further extension to his tenure. He will retire in January of 2029, just before the next general elections.
ड्यू प्रोसेस को फॉलो करके होता है, लेकिन हमारे कांग्रेस के मित्रों की तकलीफ ये है कि देश प्रगति पर जा रहा है और उन्हें देश की प्रगति से कोई लेना देना नहीं है। इसीलिए हर विषय पर वो इस प्रकार का अनर्गल प्रलाप करते हैं। इससे साफ तौर पर उनकी बेचैनी जाहिर होती है।
अब इस संबंध में तो सरकार के द्वारा औपचारिक एक प्रक्रिया होती है जिसमें जो एक परंपरा के तहत नियुक्ति होती है, इस पर कोई विमर्श आपसी विमर्श के बुनियाद पर होता है, तो इसमें कोई मतभेद और मनभेद की गुंजाइश कहाँ? जल्दीबाजी में कैसे फैसला लिया गया? जो विहित प्रक्रिया का अनुपालन अगर हुआ है और अपनी राय लोग व्यक्त कर दी है, तो सरकार को जो अधिकार क्षेत्र उसके तहत नियुक्ति हुई है।
So the process to appoint the Chief Election Commissioner has changed over the last couple of years. So up until 2023, India did not have any specified mechanism or a set procedure or even a committee for the appointment of the Chief Election Commissioner and the two election commissioners. Article 324 of the Constitution left the appointment at the discretion of the President based on an Act of Parliament. Because of the absence of a substantive act, the President used to appoint the officials on the advice of the Executive, which of course is the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. In March 2023, the Supreme Court's 5-judge constitutional bench had noted that the appointment should not be done solely on the advice of the Executive and that the appointment process should be independent. The Supreme Court then mandated a selection process where the President should appoint the Chief Election Commissioner and the election commissioners on the advice of the selection committee. In that judgment of the Constitutional Bench, the court had also outlined who should be part of this committee: the Prime Minister, the Lok Sabha Leader of the Opposition, and the Chief Justice of India. This process was to be followed until Parliament passed a new law. Now, where they got this idea from, where they got this precedent from, is that the CBI Director, for example, is appointed by a committee which comprises the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, and the Chief Justice of India. Similarly, when it comes to appointment of Lokayukta or members of the Chief of the Vigilance Commission, etc. Subsequently, Parliament passed the Chief Election Commissioner and other election commissioners' appointment conditions and services in terms of office act in August of 2023. That act, in a way, changed the members and the composition of this committee. The act removed the role of the CJI, in fact, removed the CJI itself from that committee and added instead a cabinet minister who will be part of this 3-member committee. In January the following year, in 2024, 2 petitions had challenged the validity of the act in the Supreme Court. These petitions said that the legislation contravenes the Constitutional Bench order. The act was implemented in March 2024, soon after the enactment, when 2 election commissioners, Gyanesh Kumar and Sukhbir Singh Sandhu, had been elevated as ECs. Despite the objections being raised back then too, the top court had refused to put a stay on those appointments. Now the Supreme Court will hear this case again tomorrow to decide the fate of this legislation and whether or not it is constitutionally valid or whether this circumvents the Constitutional Bench order of January 2023. All right, so is there any merit in the argument being made by Rahul Gandhi and the Congress that the CJI should also be part of the committee choosing the next Chief Election Commissioner? I'm now joined by former Chief Election Commissioner, Mr. O.P. Rawat. Thank you very much, Mr. Rawat, for speaking with us here on CNN News 18. Rahul Gandhi says the decision taken by the government yesterday to appoint Mr. Gyanesh Kumar as the next CEC goes against the judgment of the Supreme Court in 2023, which had ordered that appointment of CEC should be done by a 3-member committee which comprises the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition and the CJI. He says it is disrespectful and discourteous to continue the process of choosing the CEC without the CJI as part of the appointing panel. Is there any merit in that argument?
Actually, this issue is sub judice with Honorable Supreme Court, and therefore I would not like to comment. But I would like to say that whatever the executive has done in appointing Gyanesh Kumar is in conformity with our prevailing laws in force, because Constitution said that to appoint election commissioners and chief election commissioner, Parliament should make a law. And till that time when the law is made, they can continue appointing them in the government process. This was with Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said, you have not made the law in the last 75 years. So now we direct that till the time you make a law for appointing, selection and appointing of CEC and EC, you will go through this committee, which will be PM, CJI, and Leader of Opposition. So government took it seriously and complied with the order and enacted the law. That law says that CEC and EC shall be appointed by shortlisting 5 members by the law ministry, and then this will be going to the committee headed by PM, cabinet minister and LOP, and they will decide who will be CEC and who will be EC. So, following strictly in letter and in the spirit, they have done it according to prevailing law.
Sir, but the Supreme Court judgment, and help our viewers understand this, the essence of the Supreme Court judgment, or at least the reason why the Supreme Court put out that judgment, was because in other critical appointments, whether it's CBI director, head of the Central Vigilance Commission, etc., there are these committees which have 3 equally interested parties, so that the balance of power in that committee does not skew towards one side, which is why you have the Prime Minister, the CJI and the LOP. In this case, when you have the Prime Minister and a Cabinet Minister, the opposition's contention also is it goes against the spirit of the Supreme Court's judgment. Again, is there any merit to that argument?
Again, I will say the same. It is sub judice with Honorable Supreme Court, and therefore I will refrain to comment on that. But I will say that whatever government has done is perfectly in order and perfectly in line with the law prevailing.
Why the appointment of CECs up until 2023 used to be done by the government. The President, of course, was the appointing authority. It was, of course, at the discretion, upon aid and advice of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. Why was there a need to change that process?
Because Supreme Court ordered that you make a law for appointing, selection and appointing CEC and EC. Otherwise, you will have to go through this committee till the time you make a law. So they made the law, which was their prerogative.
But what would you say to the argument by the opposition that the skew is in favor of the government because it has the Prime Minister and a Cabinet Minister? Clearly, no Cabinet Minister is going to oppose the views of the Prime Minister.
So what? That is the law enacted by Parliament.
But it's a bias is what the opposition is claiming.
Now that bias and other things will be decided by Honorable Supreme Court.
Also, the other contention that's been made, and this is my final question, is that because the court was hearing this matter so close, within 48 hours of the order coming out yesterday, what was the pressing hurry?
Because the present CEC is demitting office, and Election Commission cannot remain without a head for even a day. Therefore, there was hurry. Another thing is, unless there is a stay order from Honorable Court, nobody can stop government or executive to follow the laid down law and take decisions.
All right. Mr. O.P. Rawat, former Chief Election Commissioner, thank you very much for joining us here on Brass Tacks. Thank you. So is Tesla coming to India, and more importantly, will Tesla make in India? The first indicator of Elon Musk's company coming to India has been the posting of job opportunities for the country on LinkedIn for the very first time. This is a clear signal that it will soon open its showrooms both in Delhi and in Mumbai. Tesla chief Elon Musk met with Prime Minister Modi during his visit to the United States last week, and now speculation is rife if a breakthrough has indeed been achieved. Tesla has made 2 previous attempts to enter the Indian market, both of which have ended in failure. There are 3 main reasons or obstacles as to why Tesla has not made its presence in India yet. First, there are steep import duties. In fact, prior to the budget, the import duties on electric vehicles were as high as 110%. The second obstacle was the government's insistence on domestic manufacturing, which still exists. And third is the not so evolved demand for electric vehicles in the Indian market, all of which was a dampener as far as Tesla's entry into the Indian market is concerned. But last year, the government announced a highly subsidized import duty of just 15%. But there are some conditions attached to it. That 15% will be only for 8,000 foreign-made electric vehicles which can be imported every year if the manufacturer of those EVs, the company that manufactures those electric vehicles, invests at least $500 million for locally manufacturing those electric vehicles. As per the policy that was changed last year, the company must invest this minimum amount, $500 million, over a 3-year period. And in that 3-year period, they have to start manufacturing and selling electric vehicles that are locally produced in India. There is, however, a time limit, or a number limit on how many cars can be imported during this 3-year period. An investment of $800 million would ensure that there is subsidized import duty of 15% for 8,000 foreign-made electric vehicles that can be imported and sold in India. Now, it is still not clear whether Tesla will make that $500 million investment to avail of this 15% duty, or will they go with what is the existing duty, which is 70% over and above the price of the car. So, let's try and break it down for you in terms of cold numbers. If Tesla were to make its entry into the Indian market, and if you're interested in purchasing a Tesla electric vehicle, how much money would you have to pay? How much would it cost you? So if the Tesla car, the electric vehicle, is made in India as part of this minimum investment policy of $500 million by the government of India, then the base variant model of Tesla Model 3, which is the cheapest out there in the market, the cheapest model that is available, that would be roughly about $39,000 US. That's what it would cost in America. That is roughly about 40 lakh rupees in India if you were to add a 15% customs duty. But like I said, that 15% customs duty is only if Tesla commits to and promises to invest $500 million to start a manufacturing line and within 3 years starts locally producing and locally selling. We have not heard any such commitment from Tesla yet. Now, if that same model, the Tesla Model 3, which is the cheapest base variant, were to be imported as a fully built luxury electric vehicle, you could incur a cost of up to 60 lakh rupees at the very minimum, because the customs duty on the imported electric vehicle would be 70%. This, of course, is an approximate price because outside of customs duty alone, there would be more local taxes involved, which might differ from state to state. There's also GST, there is registration charges, there's a whole bunch of other charges before a car finally hits the road. So the question that is being asked is, would you pay 40 lakhs or 50 lakhs or 60 lakh rupees for an electric vehicle, howsoever valuable a brand it might be, like Tesla is? Kranti Sambhav breaks this down for you.
To understand the whole Tesla game, we have to understand how electric cars or any luxury cars are important in India. And traditionally, we have been seeing the duty or the import duty on all the CBUs. And if you remember Union Budget 2025, we all saw there was a reduction of around 40% on import duty on various luxury cars. But at the same time, the agriculture cess was introduced around 40%. So the effective price remained the same for any imports. But in this case, we have to remember the scheme which we were discussing last year, which had a very long name, the scheme to promote manufacturing of electric passenger cars in India. So that scheme basically meant to improve or promote the manufacturing of electric cars in India. And under that scheme, the criteria was to bring in around $500 million to invest in India, and within 5 years you have to achieve almost 50% of localization in those electric vehicles. And under that scheme, if you qualify in that scheme, you can import your cars with just 15% duty. And if that happens, so if that happens in this case, especially in Tesla's case, then what we can assume or expect that the pricing of, for example, we were all discussing Model 3 would be the first car from Tesla to introduce in India. And if you look at its pricing between China, Europe and America, the prices are between 33,000 US dollar to 42,000. So in case Tesla plans to bring that to India, we'll just see around maybe it can come in that segment where we have seen lots of action lately. So it will be around 40 lakh bracket, I guess, and then we can see it will compete with products like Hyundai Ioniq, BMW's latest iX1 long wheelbase, or BYD C-Line 7, which is recently launched. So it is going to be very competitive, and if that scheme is implemented anytime soon, then we might see a very competitive scenario in electric vehicle market, and entry of Tesla will also mean bettering of the whole EV ecosystem and charging network.
All right, will you pay for a Tesla? We'll see. Meanwhile, the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, is on a 2-day visit to India. This high-level visit marks yet another pivotal moment in deepening of ties between Doha and Delhi. From Prime Minister Modi breaking the protocol and receiving his quote-unquote brother at the airport, to receiving a grand ceremonial welcome at the Rashtrapati Bhavan on the forecourt of the Rashtrapati Bhavan, this visit has been high on both substance and symbolism. It also underscores the commitment of both countries to enhance cooperation across a wide field of sectors, including the likes of trade, energy and cultural exchanges. 2 significant memoranda of understanding was signed at the end of that visit by the Emir of Qatar. This partnership marks a new chapter in strong economic ties between both countries. The MOUs are expected to facilitate greater cooperation in trade, investment and industrial collaboration benefiting both countries. Increased bilateral trade was one of the big highlights. The MOU aims to expand trade avenues, opening up new opportunities for industries in both countries. Also, a strengthened economic partnership. The collaboration will lead to more robust economic relationship between Doha and Delhi, and that would possibly pave the way for joint ventures and investment opportunities. Now, the reason why this is important is because just last week we saw the Prime Minister in the United States, and of course the announcement of reciprocal tariffs by US President Donald Trump. So India is now trying to diversify its trade basket, as it were, and to reduce its dependence on Indian exports into the United States, and of course even American imports into the Indian market. Hence, opening up strategic opportunities with partners like Qatar.
Unfortunately, we have some of our people who are in jail. The number at this moment is around 600, and from time to time we do see Qatari leadership granting pardons and releases them from their terms. About 85 Indians received such pardon during 2024. In today's meeting regarding whether Israel-Hamas was discussed, as I mentioned, both the leaders talked about the regional and international issues of mutual interest. Naturally, the Middle East situation and the evolving situation over there came up for discussions. Both sides conveyed their mutual positions that we have on the Israel-Hamas issue.
Meanwhile, some more domestic news. The Congress-led Telangana government has announced reduced work hours for Muslim employees during the fasting month of Ramadan, and that has prompted a furious reaction from the opposition BJP there in the state. Telangana Chief Secretary has issued an order allowing Muslim employees to leave their offices an hour earlier during the month of Ramadan, which begins either on the 1st or the 2nd of March, depending on the sighting of the moon. The orders are applicable to Muslim teachers, contractual employees, outsourcing, board and public sector workers. The BJP slammed the Congress for allowing what it called reduced work hours for Muslim employees, calling this an appeasement tactic and that no such concessions were granted to Hindus during their fast in Navratri period. BJP IT cell in charge Amit Malviya said in a post on X that appeasement bug strikes the Congress government in Telangana, which has approved relaxed work hours for Muslim state government employees during Ramzan. No such concessions are ever granted to Hindus when they fast during Navratri. He further accused the Congress of reducing the Muslim community to a mere vote bank. He also added that this tokenism is not about being sensitive to the religious beliefs of one community, but about reducing them to a mere vote bank. It should be opposed, is what the BJP is saying. But now, a state governed by one of the BJP's allies, the TDP, the neighboring state of Andhra Pradesh, has also passed a similar diktat. The Andhra Pradesh government is going to permit all state government employees who are followers of Islam, including teachers and persons hired on contract, to leave their offices or schools an hour early before closing until the 30th of March.
बहुत ही दुर्भाग्य की बात है। मैं हमारे तेलंगाना राज्य के मुख्यमंत्री रेवंत रेड्डी जी से पूछना चाहूँगा, क्या उगादी के समय पर, क्या हिंदू फेस्टिवलों के समय पर, क्या इस तरह का जीवो आपको याद नहीं आता? एक केसीआर था, जो हम उस केसीआर को 8वां निज़ाम कहते थे, लेकिन तेलंगाना की दुर्भाग्य देखिए, एक 9वां निज़ाम पैदा हो चुका है रेवंत रेड्डी के रूप में।
This is the BJP's old habit of raising the issues to divide the country and the countrymen on the basis of the religion.
All right, so is the Ukraine war about to end as it marks 3 years since this conflict began next week? Well, there is definitely a start to the process of ending this war. The United States and Russia met in Riyadh today, and both sides have agreed to press ahead with efforts to try and conclude this war. This even as Kiev and its European allies from France to Germany have all been anxiously watching from the sidelines. Russia's Minister for Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov said that both sides have agreed on several topics in principle, including restoring diplomatic staff, launching a process for continued talks on Ukraine, and exploring the lifting of economic barriers. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who represented the U.S. in these talks, has said that he is convinced that Moscow is willing to engage in a serious process to bring about a fair and enduring end to the Ukraine war. Since Ukraine was not on the talking table, President Volodymyr Zelensky has asserted that he cannot recognize any deals that are made solely by the United States and Russia without Ukraine being a part of that room or being a part of that negotiating process. In fact, Zelensky will be in Riyadh tomorrow. He will be meeting with some of the senior US interlocutors. Whether or not this leads to a big deal to end the war and in what terms, that still remains to be seen.
Україна про це нічого не знала.
Ukraine will not take part in the US-Russia talks. Ukraine did not know anything about them. Ukraine regards any negotiations on Ukraine without Ukraine as ones that have no result. We cannot recognize any agreements about us made without us, and we will not recognize such agreements. It's important for us to talk to China and get it involved to ensure pressure on Putin to end the war. We can see for the first time China's interest. I think it happened mostly thanks to the fact that all processes have sped up.
Що це в більшості своїй завдяки
в отличие от многих других стран, которые, и в особенности Украины, которая запретила себе мирные переговоры, в отличие от европейцев, которые всегда говорили про войну, про необходимость продолжения войны любой ценой.
The ongoing war in Ukraine has become a focal point in international diplomacy of late, particularly with regard to the role of the United States when it comes to providing military and humanitarian aid. As of early 2025, the United States has allocated approximately $110 billion in emergency funding to Ukraine since the Russian invasion began in February 2022. Over $65 billion of that amount was designated specifically as military assistance. This substantial financial support has been critical for Ukraine's defense against Russia's aggression. But now, questions are looming about the future for Ukraine if American funding were to cease. If the United States were to halt its financial support, the implications for Ukraine could be dire. American aid constitutes more than half of all the military assistance received by Ukraine so far. That makes it an essential lifeline for Ukraine to sustain its military operations against Russia. The absence of this American support would likely lead to a significant weakening of Ukraine's defense forces, and that could potentially allow Russian forces to gain an upper hand and escalate their offensive as this war closes in on 3 years. So in the event of a US withdrawal from funding for Ukraine, the question then arises, can Europe rise up? Can Europe fill the gap when America retreats? European nations have collectively provided substantial aid to Ukraine. Again, it's over 100 billion, but that figure includes both military and humanitarian assistance from the various countries and institutions in Europe. Notably, the European response has often been hampered by internal divisions and varying levels of commitment among member states. Germany, for example, has been reluctant and less committed than France or other European nations. For instance, even in Hungary, which has been opposed to this war, the opposition there blocked a $52 billion financial support plan for the European Union, which was aimed at providing aid to Ukraine. Eventually, the government of Viktor Orban, even though it is against this war and is a big supporter of Putin and Russia, relented, but there was a lot of drama in the run-up to it. French President Emmanuel Macron, who's been leading the charge collectively on behalf of Europe against Russian aggression, is holding an emergency meeting to address this challenge. It indicates that Europe recognizes the urgency of maintaining continued support for Ukraine. However, whether European countries can match or exceed American contributions remains uncertain given their own internal political pressures as well as economic constraints. The political landscape is also further complicated by recent developments, which is following the key phone call that happened last week between Donald Trump, the President of the United States, and Vladimir Putin, the President of Russia. It's the first time both leaders have spoken in many, many years, and certainly the first time they've spoken since this war in Ukraine began 3 years ago. Following that phone call last week between Trump and Putin, speculation has now risen regarding a potential meeting between Putin and Trump as early as later this month in Saudi Arabia. In fact, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and General Kellogg, who's been nominated by Trump as a special envoy to try and end this war, are meeting with their Russian interlocutors later this week in Saudi Arabia. Trump's position on Ukraine has been clear. He advocates for negotiating peace with Russia, and that could involve concessions which may not necessarily align with what Ukraine wants.
We're moving along. We're trying to get a peace with Russia, Ukraine, and we're working very hard on it. It's a war that should have never started.
Do you expect Zelensky to be involved in these conversations? What will his role be?
I do. He will be involved, yes.
And to try and step into this void, British Labour Prime Minister Keir Starmer has also indicated that the UK is prepared to send peacekeeping troops to Ukraine if necessary. This move suggests a willingness among some European leaders to, at least on the face of it, be seen as increasing their commitment to Ukraine's defence. But it does raise some serious questions about the long-term sustainability of aiding Ukraine and helping Ukraine with both military and humanitarian assistance without robust American support.
But nobody wants the conflict to continue, and Ukrainians, more than anybody, want the conflict to end. But we must make sure that Ukraine is at the heart of this. There can't be any negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine being at the heart of it.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has made it clear that Ukraine will not accept any peace deal that does not involve his country's direct participation. He wants to be in the room when Trump and Putin meet. He's also emphasized that territorial integrity is non-negotiable. He also insists either on NATO membership at a future date or at least NATO security guarantees as a prerequisite for any kind of settlement with Russia. None of this is part of the American plan, which is likely to be agreed upon by Russia when the leaders of both countries, that is President Trump and President Putin, meet later this month in Saudi Arabia. This hardline stand reflects a broader consensus among Ukrainian leadership that ceding any territory to Russia would undermine Ukraine's national sovereignty, and it would only further embolden more Russian aggression in the future.
I will meet with Russians, with only one Russian guy, with Putin, only after we will have common plan with Trump, Europe, and we will sit with Putin and stop the war. Only in this case I'm ready to meet, not in other compromises platforms.
So the sticking points in these negotiations include: one, territorial integrity, which Ukraine insists that it should retain control over all its territories, including the 20% or so in the eastern part of the country that's been taken over by Russia since this war began. Ukraine has also been talking about the return of Crimea, which Russia annexed in 2014, none of which is a go area as far as Putin is concerned. Then there is NATO membership, the demand for NATO membership or equivalent security guarantees from the 30-member North Atlantic military alliance. That Zelensky and the Ukrainians say is also another condition if they need to come to the negotiating table. And the most important one is that they want to counter any future possibilities of Russian aggression, much like what we saw in 2014 and much like what we saw beginning 2022, which has led to this current ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. So any agreement reached without these three conditions, Ukraine and Zelensky feel, would only embolden Russia, and it would lead to future conflicts. So the future trajectory of the war in Europe hinges significantly on whether Europe can carry on and sustain its commitment to Ukraine without any American backing. Analysts suggest that while some European countries may be able to step up their contributions, they are unlikely to match the scale or even the immediacy of American support. The risk is that without consistent funding and particularly military aid from the United States, Ukraine may find itself unable to maintain its current defensive and offensive posture against Russia. Moreover, if Trump were to follow through on his promise to negotiate with Russia, meet Putin and find that elusive peace deal, there could be immense pressure on Ukraine to acquiesce in terms unfavorable to its sovereignty. This scenario does raise concerns about whether European leaders would be willing to or even able to oppose such a dramatic shift in US policy. The question is, can Emmanuel Macron be a modern-day Charles de Gaulle and stand up to Donald Trump? In fact, Ukraine's very future and the very future of continental Europe, in a sense, hangs in the balance. All right, so US-Russia talks have started in Saudi Arabia and Riyadh. Lavrov and Rubio have met, and there is also a heightened expectation that before the end of the month, Donald Trump, the US president, could possibly meet with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. What might that mean for the Ukraine war, which is closing in on 3 years next week? And more importantly, to broaden out this discussion, to talk about the Trump presidency. He's really upending the rules of the game, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's international trade relations. Let's try and go across to Professor Jeffrey Sachs from the University of Columbia. Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, for speaking with us. So first time that US and Russian officials are sitting across the table and having one-on-one talks in Riyadh. Lavrov and Rubio have met, and there is expectation that both the presidents could likely meet before the end of the month. Just how significant is the meeting, and the fact that Russia and the US are meeting at the highest level, just what does that mean?
This is very significant. It means the end of 30 years of U.S. foreign policy based on the idea of unipolarity or hegemony. When the Soviet Union ended in December 1991, the U.S. Foreign policy establishment went into overdrive with the idea that the United States now runs the world. It based policies on that unipolarity for the next 30 years. This was a very arrogant, unwise idea because the United States, after all, is only 4.1% of the world population, so it's hardly going to run the rest of the world. I think Trump is returning to a kind of realism that we are a multipolar world. The U.S. and NATO are not going to defeat Russia in Ukraine. Ukraine has suffered terribly from especially the U.S. provocations of NATO enlargement. I think Trump is going to do something quite constructive, which is just return to normal relations with Russia. And this is good. There are no fundamental obstacles to the U.S. and Russia having normal relations.
What may that mean for the Ukrainians, though? The Ukrainians have been saying, we're not even part of the room where this conversation is happening. You're practically going to decide on our future, a war that we have fought for the last 3 years almost, and we're not even part of that conversation. So how could this likely play out with the Ukrainians?
Ukraine is in a tragic situation, and I warned them of this. Henry Kissinger had a famous line that to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. And I told the Ukrainians that they were going to end up like the Afghanistan of Europe. They didn't believe it. They put all their chips in with the U.S. No country should do that. This is a multipolar world. This is not a place where you put all your chips in with the U.S., especially if you sit next to Russia. So Ukraine could have had a much better deal for years and years and years. Now it's going to get a not so great deal. It's going to lose some territory. It will be neutral. That will be the essence of it, but it will continue. There will be a sovereign Ukraine state, a little bit less territory, but it's going to be neutral. It's not going to be a member of NATO.
How do you see the Europeans responding to this? We know there was a high-level meeting that President Macron convened. The Europeans are seeing this as a fundamental sort of break in the traditional cross-Atlantic relationship between the United States and its NATO partners in Europe. Two things. Can Europe fill in the void when America retreats? And two, how does this fundamentally change the way the Europeans view their collective security architecture?
Well, regarding the war in Ukraine, Europe cannot fill in for the United States. Even the United States plus Europe could not defeat Russia. So this is basically a war that was a terrible idea and is thankfully coming to an end. And whatever Europe says about continuing the war, this is stupid. They don't have any capacity to do that, and it makes no sense. But this is a basic change for European security and European foreign policy. For decades, all of European foreign policy was to be under the umbrella of the United States. It was to essentially hand over foreign policy to the United States. The transatlantic alliance was supposedly everything. Well, that's also a bad bet. Ukraine made a bad bet. Europe made a bad bet. Again, it's not a surprise to me. I've been saying this for many, many years. Europe needs its own foreign policy. Can it have it? Of course it can. Europe is a $20 trillion market. Europe has nuclear weapons deterrence with France. Europe has 450 million people. Europe has some of the greatest technology and, of course, the highest living standards on the planet. But Europe needs to get its act together. It needs to end the Russophobia. It needs to end the dependency on the United States. It needs to understand that Europe has to be one of the great power regions of the world, independent of the United States. I hope it can come to that. Right now, Europe is just in a state of shock and confusion.
So if I were to ask you to, take a crystal ball and gaze into the future for Ukraine, let's say 6 months from now, you're saying it's going to be a country that will probably have 20% less territory than before the war began. There is no guarantee of NATO membership. In fact, I think that's pretty much off the table, that Ukraine is never going to be a NATO member. Neither will there be any form of security guarantees from NATO. You foresee that sort of a future for Ukraine?
That's correct. But I think that there can and should be security guarantees from the United Nations Security Council. I would like to see a final arrangement secured in the UN Security Council, because we should be aiming to make collective security in the world. The UN is very weak right now, but it could be strengthened if the US drops its unilateral veto all the time, and if it comes to understand that in a multipolar world, we need a multipolar governance system. By the way, one of my favorite initiatives is to get India into the UN Security Council as a permanent member, because that would make it a much, much stronger body, a much more legitimate body. But that's the place where guarantees and agreements should be secured, not in bilateral treaties.
सस्ते वाले
While hearing the plea filed by YouTuber Ranveer Allahbadia, the Supreme Court bench came down heavily on him. However, they've granted him relief from arrest. As of now, Ranveer Allahbadia has cases pending against him at Jaipur, at Guwahati, apart from that at Mumbai as well. This very case pertains to remarks which were made on India's Got Latent show. Apart from Ranveer Allahbadia, there are several other promoters as well as judges of the show who are under the radar of various agencies. Particularly when it comes to Ranveer Allahbadia, he had moved the Supreme Court asking for relief from arrest and also clubbing of all the FIR against him. Now here, particularly the counsel that appeared for Ranveer Allahbadia, that's Abhinav Chandrachud, happened to mention before the court that he was receiving death threats and also there was name calling being made against the family members of Ranveer Allahbadia. However, the court mentioned that making comments, obscene comments, just because they had the authority on YouTube does not account for them coming before the court. They also came down heavily saying that such comments are something that would not be permissible before the parents or family. So it's not kind of a comment that one would make. Particularly mentioning of these obscene comments, the court, however, though came down heavily on Ranveer Allahbadia, granted him relief from arrest in all of these cases on the condition that he would have to be present before all these enforcement agencies in person and record the statement. Also, they went further to mention that Ranveer Allahbadia did not particularly have his counsel along with him when he appears before them for questioning. Now here, before this, the Khar police station at Mumbai had also reached out to Ranveer Allahbadia. However, sources had mentioned that he was not to be found and it was not possible to communicate with him, which is where his legal team was in touch with the Khar police station. The court has also gone further and mentioned that Ranveer Allahbadia should submit his passport and so that he cannot travel outside the country. Apart from that, promoters of the very show, also were judges, are not allowed to have any further show until any orders by the court. The agencies which would further be questioning Ranveer Allahbadia have also been instructed to submit a report before the court, so which is where. Now what's also important to note is that this very statement that has been made by court would further have Ranveer Allahbadia to be ensured that he be present before all of these agencies, particularly so that he cooperate with them for the investigation. Now here the next summon for Ranveer Allahbadia is before the Maharashtra Cyber Cell, which is for February 24th. So which is where now Ranveer Allahbadia would have to be present before Maharashtra Cyber Cell and record his statement. Apart from that, the Khar police station is also trying to find Ranveer Allahbadia, and so is a case with summons issued from Jaipur as well as Guwahati. But on the other hand, the National Commission for Women had also sent summons to approximately 7 people who were promoters, directors and producers of the show India's Got Latent. When it comes to these very summons that were issued by the NCW, none of them appeared before the NCW. In fact, Apura Mukhija, apart from that Samay Raina, Ranveer Allahbadia had requested that they be allowed to be present through video conferencing, something that was rejected by the National Commission for Women, and the second date has now been given. Samay Raina and Apura Mukhija have been called in on March 6th, whereas Ranveer Allahbadia has been summoned for March 11th.
सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने भी इस पूरे मामले में जो आरोपी हैं रणवीर अलाहाबादी, उसको काफ़ी फटकार लगाई। जो लैंग्वेज यूज़ होते थे काफ़ी ऑब्जेक्शनेबल थे। सुप्रीम कोर्ट में ये बोला।
एडवोकेट आशीष जी राय और उनके सहकारी लोगों ने मुझे राज्य महिला आयोग को एक कंप्लेंट दर्ज की थी। उन्होंने उसमें कहा था कि रणवीर अलाहाबादी और उनकी पूरी टीम बहुत गंदे कंटेंट लेके यूट्यूब पे कुछ वीडियो अपलोड करते हैं और एक प्रोग्राम लेते हैं कि उसके ऊपर कार्रवाई की जाए। तो उसका रेफरेंस लेके हमने मुंबई पुलिस को लेटर भेजा था और कहा था कि इसकी पूरी तरह से जांच की जाए और इसकी जांच करते हुए आपके पास जो भी इंफॉर्मेशन आ जाए उसके ऊपर उचित कार्रवाई की जाए। दूसरे ही दिन उनके ऊपर एफआईआर दर्ज की गई और इस कंटेंट लेके, इससे गंदे कंटेंट लेके जहाँ भी ये वीडियो किए जाते हैं, जस्ट शूट किया जाता है, वो जाके लोकेशन देख के पुलिस ने अच्छी तरह से इसका पूरा का पूरा तपास किया है। और उसके बारे में आज सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कहा है कि जिनके दिमाग में गंदगी भरी होती है वो लोग इस तरह से अपने माता पिता और इस तरह से बातें करते हैं। तो रणबीर इलाहाबादी और उनके पूरे की पूरे टीम ने आगे जाकर पुलिस को अच्छी तरह से इसमें तपास में सहयोग करें। जो भी गंदे कंटेंट इनके यूट्यूब पे हो गए वो इनके यूट्यूब चैनल से हटा दिए जा, और अलग अलग जगह में, अलग अलग राज्य में जो उनके ऊपर जो भी एफआईआर दर्ज हुई है इकट्ठा किए जाए, ताकि पुलिस को तपास करने में आसानी हो जाए। और आगे जाके ऐसे कौन से ही शो इनके मतलब अभी इन दिनों में ऐसे कौन से ही उनके शो अलाउड नहीं किए।
Viewers, Hindus are inclusive to a fault. They welcome debate about their most closely held beliefs. But that doesn't mean that they don't respect their faith